We are good to go, ma'am.
Thank you. Hello and welcome to Nandini Murali, the author of Left Behind Surviving Suicide Loss, brought out by Westland. It's one of the most affecting books I've read recently, and I think, especially in this time of so much loss and so much suffering, it's something that you turn to for succor, for learning, for how to cope with grief, not just one's own, but everything that is around us currently. So, Nandini Murli, thank you very much for writing this. I think this comes at a time where people can understand your loss, of course, the loss of your husband to suicide, but they can also understand it in the larger context of so much suffering that's around us. So, thank you very much. I don't want to go into all the details of the book. It's so traumatic to read. I don't know how you wrote it, but I'm glad you wrote it. I think it's a book that is much needed. So just tell me how it happened, and why you chose to write this.
Yeah, first of all, Kaveri, thank you so much for having me on this show. I've read so much of what you write. So, and I just can't believe I'm having this conversation with you. So, thank you so much for inviting me. And and also, I'm deeply touched that you've engaged deeply with Left Behind, my book, and found a certain resonance with it. How do I begin? It's now exactly 4 years since the loss, and it's very strange I'm having this conversation with you because I felt this year has marked a personal milestone in my engagement with loss and grief. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself. So rewind to 2017, April 27th. Seemed like any other day. I had with Murli and I had been married for over 30 years, and he was one of the most well-known urologists in the country. Academic pedigrees, everything, and life was good. Life was really good for us, and. I think April 27th, yes, of course. That was the day I think my life changed forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think ever since then my life is divided into two, before April 27th and after 27th. As I've written in my book, I was traveling on work to Chennai. I was just away for a couple of days. Everything seemed fine. There were no red flags that I immediately perceived, at least. But then I walked into the home. He doesn't answer my phone. Had to just break into the home, and I find him dead. So that was, I think, an iconic moment for me when everything, I think, my the world beneath my feet just began to crumble. And yes, at that point it was very traumatic. I think that's an understatement. Yeah, because I think my mind just went into completely do what it needs to be done mode. I think it went into slow motion
Yeah.
because am I seeing what I'm seeing? And then, of course, there was this, I think, this wellspring of grief.
Yeah.
And I knew nothing about suicide then, Kaveri. Not the perspectives I have now.
Right.
And then, of course, there were it was medico legal, and
Yeah.
then people had to, all those things happened.
Yeah, and Nandini, sorry to interrupt, but some of the questions that were put to you at that point, I mean, how harsh it seems. I suppose they thought that they were doing their work, the police, but how harsh it was, wasn't it?
Oh, it was like, again, at that point, I mean, today I have the wisdom of being able to retrospect. But at that time, until then, suicide, like, of course, I have to be very honest, until it happened to me, it was something which happened to others.
People, yeah,
Other people, suicide was statistics.
yeah,
Suicide was sensationalized in the media,
right,
and it was hush hush.
yeah,
I've had friends who had lost a loved one to suicide, but it struck me then and even even now, there is this toxic silence around it.
Yeah.
The death was never spoken about. It was as if that person never existed.
Hmm.
So that was, and I think it's a very non-normative death, Kaveri.
Yeah.
Every living being wants to live.
Yes.
Life is so precious. We're seeing it in the pandemic
Right.
that people go to any length to save their
To
loved ones.
survive. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And here we have our loved ones deciding that they don't want to live.
Right.
So I think it sort of violates a very fundamental norm of people wanting to live. And why do some of our loved ones do this? So it's a conundrum, and I think there are really no answers. And like every survivor of suicide loss, I think would have realized, we keep part of the journey is asking those questions and then realizing that there are really no answers. So, coming back to your question about the insensitivity, I was swamped with insensitivity from family,
Yeah.
people I considered family, people I'd considered friends, and of course, the law enforcement. I understand law enforcement because it's an institution,
Yeah.
but and of course the media also. I think they were very sensational because Murli was very well known.
Well known.
Yes, so we had some regional language newspapers
Splashing it.
flashing it. Well-known doctor dies, commits suicide, which itself is very
It's
insensitive.
yeah, which is the wrong usage as well, right?
Yes, yeah,
It dies by suicide.
yeah. It's because I think there are extremely WHO guidelines on responsible reporting of suicide. And I'm going to come to that later
Yeah.
because I'm extremely concerned that suicide is viewed as tragedy porn,
Right.
which I'm very particular. My book is not. It's
Yes.
not tragedy porn. We'll probably talk
We'll
about that
talk
later.
about that because we saw all that unfolding last year with the suicide or death of
Yeah,
Sushant Singh Rajput, and it was most unseemly. And
absolutely.
it was consumed like porn,
Yeah,
that's it. But sorry, I keep interrupting, Nandini, but to come
that's okay.
back to this point of this massive insensitivity around you, people asking you, why are you wearing colored clothes? People asking you, no, but what had happened? What was going on? I mean, what people people don't understand when there is a tragedy. They don't get it.
They don't get it. Unfortunately, I think a tragedy of this magnitude, Kaveri, they really don't get it. I think it becomes sort of very voyeuristic, and I think suicide brings out the worst in
Because
people. I've experienced it firsthand, so it's been a very experiential for me. It really brings out the worst in people. I think somewhere in my book I've mentioned even vultures feed only on carrion.
right,
They don't feed on live flesh.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the gossip, the relentless speculation. It's almost you're in a fishbowl.
yeah,
Yeah, and interestingly, unlike other kinds of bereavement where people come to condole you, offer their empathy, and offer their support, here it becomes, I think, the condolence, so-called condolence visit becomes an excuse to gossip and speculate.
yes,
So, and you're also like viewed as, oh my God. And I think there are gendered dimensions to this.
yes.
Yeah. And I'm sure you would resonate with that. If it's a woman who loses her partner to suicide or a mother who loses a child to suicide, it's
So
sort of an
much judgment, so much
absolutely.
judgment.
Yeah. And I think for us, when someone we go through a traumatic bereavement like this, it's this rampant insensitivity which is actually worse than the primary trauma.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
But Nandini, how did you find that courage to face up to it? Because sometimes you can just, and there must have been moments when you must have just said, why?
Oh, yeah. I have to be very honest with you, Kaveri. I might look very sorted right now.
You
And
do, and I'm glad and touch wood.
yes. But it's been a very messy journey. It's been very non-linear. I didn't have all this gyan, the moment it happened, and then I was like transformed immediately. I think I slipped, I faltered, I fell down, hurt myself, but every time I fell down, I had that courage to stand up. I would also think perhaps I'm naturally resilient, or would say anti-fragile. Yeah.
Love that.
I think resilient is you absorb shocks, but I think when you're anti-fragile, you go beyond that.
Right.
Yeah. And I must also mention that I am on a spiritual path.
Yeah.
And I think it was my guru who said, stop playing the victim card. And I'm so glad for that.
Right.
That was a lifeline for me,
Right.
because I think when one is swamped with a tragedy like this, the default response is to play the victim.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't deserve it.
Yeah. What had I ever done? Why
Yeah.
me? I
Why
never hurt
me?
anyone. I never
Ex-
hurt anyone. Those are the things that come to you, and then the other thing is, Nandini, playing things back in your mind and thinking, what did I do wrong? Did I do anything wrong? That feeling of guilt which you describe.
yeah.
That is also something that is such a heavy, heavy burden we place on ourselves, right?
Yeah. I would think that my journey has been very it's been solitary. I've had amazing support from my birth family, my very close friends who are family to me. But that said, Kaveri, I think the actual journey was very solitary.
Right. Has to be.
Yeah, yeah. There is, people can come with me up to a point, almost like come with me to the dwara, the threshold, but taking the leap, it had to be me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I leapt and the net appeared to cushion my fall. Yeah. And I did go through, all the messy emotions. There was anger. I was angry with Murli. It felt like an abandonment. It
Yeah.
felt like a betrayal. I was angry with myself because, I felt even my love wasn't enough to have prevented this. I think love is an antidote, but now I know it's not. Yeah. And also,
Yeah.
angry with the system. Suicide, I just feel, doesn't take place in isolation. I was angry with the medical establishment. Yeah, I was angry with so many things, and a sense of really being let down. All that was there. And then I think the societal stigma, shame, and secrecy around suicide, you just catch it. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact,
So,
talk about the four S's, which I
yes.
think are very, very
Yeah.
key. We talk
Yeah.
about stigma, secrecy, shame, silence. And these really are very, very powerful ways to keep suicide in this box where, if it opens, the demons it unleashes are so over, they just devour you. So that's one way of keeping it there,
Yeah.
keeping it separate. Talk a little about that, Nandini, these four S's which you describe so well in the book.
Yeah, the four S's. I actually, maybe I'll give you a little context to
Yeah,
this,
please.
Kaveri. I work, my professional engagement has been largely with the communities and people who have been marginalized.
Right.
Either I work a lot with the LGBT community, other marginalized communities, people with mental illness, people with disabilities. So, this whole so stigmatization, I had a lot of complete cognitive and conceptual clarity about stigma and how it operated. I was very clear about that. But then, of course, I once this happened to me, I realized, oh my gosh, this is how stigma feels like. The experiential aspect of stigma, I suppose you just can't get through reading uh, all the books in all the libraries in the world, or engaging with people who have been who go through that. That is something you have to experience firsthand. And when the suicide happened, when I discovered it, there was a little time in the book I mentioned that before the whole world decided to descend on us, it was just Murli's. I mean, it's difficult for me to refer to him as a body. Yeah, but
Please don't.
yeah, it was Murli and I in the home.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it was a very beautiful moment. I still think that was one of those iconic moments when I think Left Behind was born. I just felt I was chosen. I felt like a channel,
Right.
and I just felt maybe Murli was also. I just felt he was trying to communicate something to me that this book has to be written right and just be that channel. That was when I decided I'm going to speak up
Right.
no matter what, because I felt I needed to be the change I want to see in the world. But that said, I was very clear that this book is not going to usher a revolution or any such thing like that, but it's like throwing a not so random pebble in the waters
Yes.
and it ripples.
Yeah.
So coming back to your question about stigma, uh, very soon I realized that we've had deaths in the family, we've had friends who've lost loved ones, but when I went to those bereavements, it was very different. The whole qualitatively the energy was very different. There was so much of compassion, there
Yeah.
was so much of love and support. But here I didn't know that, I couldn't articulate it at that point. I just felt nobody really cared about me. And and I think I it was because of the trauma. I think for what I saw, it was like my nervous system was on fire, and
Right.
I just wanted people to just hold me. And uh, that touch was so what I need. But very few people reached out, and it was like very cursory, and what they did was being judge and jury.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't realize all that then, but it something felt wrong. That was very very clear. And uh, and then when I started reading about it after all the drama had sort of settled, and
Right.
everyone goes back to their lives,
To their
and
lives and
yeah,
yeah.
I'm left behind, and I have to now, I'm sort of looking at the ruins of my past life. And that was when I started reading about this. What was happening? What was this? And a desultory Google search threw up so much. And that was when I discovered, oh, this is stigma. No
Yeah.
wonder people don't talk about it. And I'm someone, I think writing is some a very central. It comes very naturally to me. I express myself through writing, and what better way could I, talk about this? And I found that there was nothing in the Indian context.
Yeah.
Nobody had spoken about it. And one of Kala Fine, who's now a very good friend, her book was an inspiration. I just Googled it. Just Google just threw up that book, and the coincidences between her life and mine were unbelievable. That was so inspirational, Kaveri. At that point, I felt if there was one person who understood what I was going through, it was Kala. And then I said, let me see if there's some book in the Indian context, because closer home, you want to know how people are dealing with this. There was nothing. So I said, I'm going to write about this. But at that point, I wasn't writing for an audience. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? I was writing for myself.
Right.
And it started as a journal. And I couldn't write for the first year.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll talk about that later. But the book,
Unable to.
I was overwhelmed, Kaveri. The first year, I think there was not a single day I didn't cry. It's like it was like, oh my God, each day was very difficult. I used to live moment by moment, uh, you know, because I never the grief would be very predatory. It
Right.
was like I never know when I would be ambushed. So even meeting people was very difficult because I would just dissolve into tears.
Right.
Oh, it was very challenging the first year, but I was journaling.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
And
that helped you, you think?
oh, it helped a lot. It was, and I was reading extensively
Right.
about this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
probably
this,
read every single book on suicidology in the first year. Yeah.
and
So
there's a lot of literature out there, not just on suicides, but also on deaths, like Joan Didion or Breath
yes.
Becomes Air. I mean, these are
Yeah.
things that you can cling to.
Yes.
They give you that sense of what loss is, how you can overcome it. It doesn't have to be suicide, but you
Yeah.
understand. Did those books help you?
Yes. I read Didion much before this. But then after the loss, I reread The Year of Magical
Magical
Thinking.
thinking.
Oh, yes. And the first year, this magical thinking was predominant because I would just feel Murli is here, standing here, he's coming out, his presence was very, very tangible. But after the first year, the magical thinking receded. When Breath Becomes Air, I'd read it just a year before what I was going through, and I was simply struck by the way it was such a poetic book.
Yes.
But that said, Kaveri, I also find that uh, with those kind of losses, you don't have to deal with the extra baggage of stigma.
Yeah.
But when in suicide grief, the stigma makes the grief so disenfranchised, it's almost as if we have no right to grieve.
Yeah.
So for me, writing the book was sort of reclaiming this power. It was providing a counter narrative.
Right.
Forget about being marginalized. We are not even there on the margins.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was about claiming our space. Because those of us who've lost a loved one to suicide, we have been responsible spouses, responsible
Ah,
parents,
absolutely.
yeah, responsible children.
Yeah.
So and I also feel each one is only responsible for one's life.
Yeah.
You might be in a spousal relationship, you might be in a parental relationship, but I think you don't outsource responsibility.
No,
So
eventually there is such a thing as personal responsibility, individual
absolutely,
responsibility.
absolutely,
How much can you take responsibility for another person, no matter
exactly,
how much you love them?
yeah, yeah,
I
true,
think that is a very fundamental part of this journey. I think to understand that beyond a point, it really is your own. It could be karma or your own
yes, absolutely.
individuality. You can't do anything beyond that. But
You
that's a
know,
very hard journey, isn't it?
it is, but somehow I think I don't know where we get this idea that you are responsible for another person.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
Yeah,
about personal.
especially if you're a mother or if you're
Yeah,
a wife, you always said to me, oh, look at your husband, aren't you taking care of him? Look at your child, aren't you taking? I mean, these are things that you hear around you, so you sort of internalize it.
absolutely, absolutely. And in a traumatic bereavement like this, I think it's amplified million times. And I think that's something we need to be first aware of, and then address. And I think the toxic silence around suicide makes, I think, such conversations impossible. There are no spaces.
Yeah. But Nandini, I also wanted to focus on this other aspect, that you also, by reaching out to other people, by sharing your grief in a way, and also your knowledge, by your empathy, uh, you also actually overcame it. I think by setting up your organization,
Yeah,
that was a remarkable thing, wasn't it? Because we tend to burrow down in our grief, and you descend into a rabbit hole, and then you don't come out of it. But when you decide that you want to help other people as well, that also is a very fundamental change.
yeah, it is, I think. And I just felt it all happened so organically that I just felt there was no any great individual effort from my part. It's not that I had a big strategic vision and things like that. but I just wanted to transform through this tragedy, and what, that was the counter narrative.
Yeah.
Yes. And the other thing I was very concerned about, Kaveri, is that the book is not perceived as tragedy porn.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's of course it's a tragedy, but I think the message of the book was beyond that. How do you transform through the tragedy? How do you go beyond the tragedy? And I didn't want the suicide to be a label, or I didn't want it to define me, restrict me, or minimize me in any way. It's a huge part of my life, but it's just a part of who I am, or what I do. And as you said, I think the first year of the tragedy, I think almost on the exact date, I set up this little initiative called Speak, which is part of a larger mental health NGO called the MS Chellamuthu Trust and Research Foundation. It's all about creating those safe, supportive spaces for people to talk about it. I think that was the first thing, and when I go and talk, like, and tell people, look, this is what happened to me, and therefore I do what I'm doing, I think people sit up. Yeah. And I think it's this is where I think people with lived experiences have a huge role in changing the narrative. We've seen that happen in HIV/AIDS. We've seen that
Yeah.
happen in the LGBT community. Because there is a certain authenticity to that. Uh, and I think it's time that lived experience, people with lived experiences are acknowledged and valued, because I think we come with so much of wisdom and insights, um, which are valuable on their own. Yeah.
And but for that we need to change a lot of the laws around mental health, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
We need to do that. And people are talking about it, people are asking for these changes, because clearly we don't have enough trained psychologists and psychiatrists to deal with this. I mean, the problem is much bigger than the
Oh,
number of
yeah.
trained people. And I think we saw this during the pandemic as well. A lot of people were trained online to do this, to reach out to villagers. For instance, Anganwadi workers were doing this in a lot of rural areas. What is your experience of that, Nandini? Talk a little about this whole, as you said, the people with lived experience becoming agents of change.
Yeah, I have always been fascinated. As I said, I had a long engagement in the HIV/AIDS
Yeah.
sector. And even then, it impressed me about, I saw people infected and affected by HIV/AIDS taking charge, and, having the courage to step up and say, I am HIV infected. And the whole narrative took on a different spin, because those of us who were working as consultants, we really sat up and listened to them, because they brought a certain authenticity and power which was impossible to ignore. And I was so impressed that it took a lot of courage. This, I'm talking of the early 90s.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
remember those in those days. It was so powerful to see some of them coming out and talking about
Oh, yeah.
even the terminology that again we used to use. AIDS patients.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
that changed. People living with AIDS, with HIV.
Yeah,
In fact, yeah,
HIV,
yeah,
exactly.
right,
This a whole thing about sex and sexuality,
yeah,
being such a taboo,
oh, yeah,
and and that stayed with me for a very long time. Then, of course, with the LGBT community, and we've seen how they've been able to push legislation simply
absolutely.
because of collectivizing and coming from a very empowered position. But I just feel, as far as the suicide discourse in the country is concerned, there are no voices of people with lived experiences. At least, and when I talk of people with lived experience, I mean those with a loss experience, like me, who've lost a loved one to suicide, and those who attempt survivors.
Right.
I
And
think
lots
they're
of
also,
them.
Lots of them. The thing is, Kaveri, once I started talking, several of my friends, my former colleagues and very good friends, they came up and told me that, oh, we've been struggling with suicide ideation. We have attempted, then we sought professional help, and now we're doing well. And I would have never guessed. And I would ask them, why are you telling me this? They say, no, because you're being so honest and open. So it's giving us the courage
Correct.
to step out of the closet. So I think this whole thing of stepping out of the closet
Yeah,
is a responsibility which I think people impacted by suicide loss and suicide survivors have to, take accountability for. And That's extremely, extremely important because I think across the world we are seeing this happening.
yeah,
Because otherwise, this whole suicide discourse becomes so clinical, so epidemiological. Statistics and numbers and uh, actually it's the humanness is lost.
yeah,
And I think we and even mental health professionals themselves, it's so focused on prevention, but where is postvention in the country? That's
right.
something I'm wondering. After a loss happens, how do we support the bereaved family? The insensitivity is rampant. I'm sometimes very concerned because the bereavement issues are very different, Kaveri.
Yeah,
It's like you can't just plug it in and say, okay, they've also gone through a bereavement. This whole nature of disenfranchised grief is something very, very different. And I think that needs to be normalized.
mm,
Right now, we are afraid to talk about. I would imagine when this happened to me, even I hesitated. Sometimes, is it okay? What do I tell people? I wanted to invent socially acceptable reason for the death.
right.
And this is the only death where you will do that.
Yeah,
You know, Something socially acceptable is fine.
yeah.
But I realized that, oh, that's the stigma. So why would you have to cover it up? uh, you know so And I think uh, the insensitivity is rampant. So there is no postvention.
Yeah,
It's heavily prevention based.
right.
It's you know We need support groups, of people with a loss experience. I'm currently a member in a wonderful online support group for people bereaved by suicide. And it's the conversations we have there. It's so empowering. You just feel the whole experience is normalized. Oh, there are other people like you who've had
Right.
a similar loss. So I think we need to sort of get into that space. And right now it's not happening, but I'm hopeful it will. Yeah.
Nandini, you also trained yourself. You worked so much on yourself, and really sort of overcame this through a process of education, or self-education, looking for spiritual answers, training your mind. Talk a little about that journey, and not just the journaling, but the training of yourself to, become this change maker. Although
Yeah.
you didn't know you were doing it, but you were actually doing it.
Yeah, true. I think maybe I'll have to go back a little.
Yeah.
Lots of events in my life probably have prepared me for this moment. I've had a long struggle with illnesses, multiple spine surgeries, including a cancer. I mean, I'm fine right now, but it's sort of uh, I think it taught me that there were uh, empowering ways to deal with challenges. I don't know. It's just maybe something in me. I didn't want. I don't follow the herd, Kaveri.
Mhm. Obvious.
Yeah, I just march to the beat of my own drum. So
Right.
I just felt the usual Rona Dona stereotypical ways of coping,
Why
no.
is God doing this to me?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
That's
And
our
I,
first reaction in
yes,
all traumas.
yeah,
And
of
that's also
course.
a natural reaction.
Absolutely, and I did go through it
Yeah,
despite my guru's injunction. It was very comforting to get into that, but I caught myself
yeah.
every time I would get into this trap. I would get myself out and say, okay, awareness. Once you're aware, it
Yeah.
doesn't have its hold. So what I'm trying to say is, during the illnesses, oh, it was like, I'm delighted to be alive today, because so many medical complications. Yeah, but I think I was able to deal with it. Uh, in a very very empowered way, and that was when I got to understand that the body is so central in this spiritual path. I think there is a tendency to sort of negate the body
Yeah.
and think that, oh, it's secondary and the mind is everything. For me, it was, I think, my knowing itself is very very embodied for me, because in my earlier life, I think I was a classical victim. Yeah, so when I say I've sloughed off victimhood, I know I've been there. And I'm not disowning that part of me at all. But it taught me the illness. It was, I think, the illness was my body's way of telling me, listen, your life is very unsustainable. Take charge, be responsible.
Yeah.
you know and once I started de-victimizing, that process of de-victimization, I found that my health improved considerably.
Right.
That was when I discovered traditional systems of medicine, and how much they expect you to be responsible for the choices you make. And then simultaneously, I had started, I had got into the spiritual path. And I think a lot of rigorous daily sadhana practices, which gradually became integrated into my life. And of course, extensive reading and meeting wonderful people. I think at every stage, this sort of prepared me. Probably there was this divine plan of, oh, this is going to be the biggest challenge. So when this happened, Kaveri, I think I was already at a certain point in my journey where, it sort of, I think it doesn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
So there was this constant iteration and refining, and it's like alchemy, base metals turning into gold. So, and when this happened, and uh, I think the stage was just right. um, and yeah, and uh, I must also say, the grief itself for me was very very embodied. I would feel it in, actually, in every cell of my
Right.
body. It's not just in the mind.
Right.
Yeah, and as much as I was reading, writing, I think it's the being grounded on the spiritual path is what I think gave me the courage to stay on the path.
Hmm.
Because there were times when it was so turbulent and chaotic. I didn't think I would reach the shore. Yeah.
And did you feel Murli was with you all through this journey?
Oh yes, definitely, definitely. And I must also say that uh, I'm realizing that he's physically absent. But there
Yeah.
is, yes, yes. Ironically, when he was embodied, I think his profession took so much of his time.
Right.
Yeah. But in a very paradoxical sense, I do sense his presence around.
Me
And I think for me, this grief has been a very sacred journey, Kaveri. It's not about the cyclical stages of grief and you're done with it. I don't think I'll move on, but I think I'm moving through the grief,
Wow.
and it's helping me get in touch with parts of myself I never knew existed. It's been a very interior, very inward journey. Yeah. And uh,
Can you ever move on from grief, Nandini? It's impossible.
it's
It'll always
impossible.
be there, right?
Yeah,
You have
yeah,
to understand that.
yeah. And I think you move through the
Yes. I think that's
grief.
a really beautiful way of putting it, you know.
Yes,
You
yeah,
have to move through it and
yes.
you have to keep doing it.
Yes, yes, and it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And I think when you move through the grief, it's not that you forget the past.
Yeah.
You honor the past. Past is sacred, but you also have your eyes. You go forward. So it's about honoring the past. And I remember my mom telling me that she said, Murli will always be a sacred memory for you. And I think it's the sacrality of it. And I also feel in a very spiritual sense, when one is disembodied, when the body is not there, probably I think the 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 quality of the interaction itself is very, very different.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you sometimes speak to him?
I don't. Yes, I used to speak a lot earlier, but now I think I just sense his presence, and that itself, I think it. I don't need words at all. Yeah, I have a picture of him in the drawing room. Where
Okay.
it's a very happy picture.
Right.
So I just feel when I'm earlier, I used to, when I was in the throes of grief, I would just look at that picture. It was a very beautiful smile he had. So it was like, oh, I knew that you can. I know you can do this. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is really traumatic, even just to listen to you. But I hope it gives people a sense of courage to cope with their own grief and their sorrow. I think that is the most important thing. And I really do recommend it very, very highly to people. I think they will find in it some way of holding on to the goodness in life.
Kaveri, yes, I would want to clarify something here. I've been asked this so many times. Was it re-traumatizing? Was it traumatic? Etc. Etc. I think my book and this part of my journey is not about just the trauma.
Yeah.
Yes, the trauma happened, the incident happened. I had no control over it. It had to happen. And so it happened. So what do you do after that? It's that which I think is very important. And when I was writing the book, it was sheer joy. There was no question of being re-traumatized in any way, because I just felt I started writing the book after a year, when I think I had dealt with quite a bit of the initial phase, at least. Can't say that I was completely sorted then, but then when the actual writing of the book, I think it happened from a space of great joy, a lot of love, and a lot of equanimity, because I felt that that is what I would want readers to resonate with.
Right.
Yes, I would experience anger, I would experience the sadness, but would ground myself back in that equanimity, and then right from there. So it was like going there, coming back, going there, coming back, but the grounding was in that space of equipoise. So for me, it was not re-traumatizing at all,
Right.
because I think the important thing is I choose to tell the story on my terms,
Yeah.
because I was aghast at how suicide narratives are hijacked by everyone with such a sense of entitlement. And so I said, no, I'm going to reclaim that right to write, so to say, the right to own our stories. So because of that, I didn't find it traumatizing. What is traumatizing for me is when others hijack
Yeah.
uh, my right to grieve and my right to tell my story on my terms. That's traumatizing, not the decision to write the book. And if you see the cover of the book,
Yeah.
I didn't want the gloom and doom
Yeah.
thing.
It's a very joyous cover.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and I am also feeling the sense of lightness,
Yeah.
because despite it all, it is a very beautiful world. I don't know whether it's probably being on the spiritual path. It's sort of uh, filling me with a lot of joy and lightness, and and I think it's been a 4 year very intense journey, Kaveri. So probably at the space where I am right now, it the transformation didn't happen overnight. Yeah, uh, there is no magic wand or a, you know, which can just change things.
Switch.
But I think, yeah, the commitment to stay on the path, to fall, to falter, and to, uh, it sort of got me in touch with my humanness, and therefore, I can probably connect with the humanness of another person who is
Yeah.
going through a loss. Yeah, yeah,
And that's very important, isn't it? To connect
yes,
with people and to share that sorrow. But as you said, also the sense of joy that we still have a life and we have a good life and we should celebrate that.
absolutely, absolutely. I completely agree with you.
But
um
I wonder, Murli would have been very proud of you, I think. What
he was, and I'm sure he would have. um
to see
yeah,
how you're doing.
he was someone very supportive of my writing. Though earlier I would think, oh, I especially we had a little book launch, so that was when I felt I really missed him then, because I felt he should have been there to see this, and not, not this book. Yeah.
Yeah,
um,
maybe another book.
he did see my first book. um, uh, and yeah, he was there when the first book was out, but he knew writing was so important to me. He was completely supportive of my writing journey, and in fact would often refer to me as a right brain, because he said, being a surgeon, he was so left brain. So he
Right.
said, what would you do if I'm not around? Sometimes I tell him, listen, not been around for 4 years and I'm doing very well. It was almost like integrating the his left brain into
Right.
my being. Yeah, I think that's happened. There are certain things where I really valued his
Right.
decision making, so integrate that into my life, and draw that energy from him. So I think that's been happening. Yeah.
Are there things that you remember particularly? Any conversations that sometimes come to you and you say, "Oh, I didn't remember that. Now I think, now I do." Sometimes those snatches of memory come back to you.
Oh yeah, I loved his precision, passion, and purpose.
Right.
The professional and personal standards he set for himself, and for others, his students. So I had a ringside view of it for 30 odd years.
Yeah.
That's something I relate with, and both of us love dogs.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, we bonded over dogs,
Right.
and the two of them are with me. They were very young when he passed on, and he was very fond of them. I think I
What are
write about.
they? What breed are they?
Mali is a golden retriever.
Wow.
Minnal is a Rajapaliyam, which is a local a hound, a variety of hound. So, and he used to be bonkers about them, and so were they. So, and I think they miss him as much as I do. Yeah, and Mutli was also a foodie. I used to love cooking, but last 4 years I don't cook.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's
every time I step into the kitchen, it brings back. So he used to love the my cooking. So occasionally I do make something. Invariably it would be his favorite thing, his favorite food, and very nostalgic then. Yeah, and he used to be a movie buff.
Oh,
So, oh my, the kind of movies he's seen. So when I sometimes, see the kind of movies which come out, almost every day. That's how he would unwind.
Okay, you would watch
Yeah,
it.
after,
Yeah,
yeah, watch a movie, one movie a day.
right.
He said, no highbrow stuff for me, like unlike you, he would tell me, because he says, I deal with very long hours of surgery, so I just need to just chill out. So, and yeah, and many lots of other small things. He would also always feel that I'm very naive and trusting.
I think all husbands think that.
Oh, that's so reassuring to hear that. So he says, oh, you just believe everyone is so sweet, and so so I miss him telling me this.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And when he used to tell me, I would say, oh my gosh, there he goes. But now I think, oh yeah, that is also important, because now that I'm by myself, I think I also need to sort of be able to sense um, whom to trust. And
Yeah, I
yeah,
think that is very important.
yeah,
And at this stage, I think it's very important. But I want to talk a little about your dogs because they
yeah.
they understand grief and sorrow so well.
Oh,
It is amazing. I mean, I've not seen even human beings react like that.
absolutely, absolutely. I think they have a very visceral understanding of grief.
Yeah,
Mali, my golden retriever, I call her the world's best grief therapist. Yeah, trauma therapist, she's the best. They don't make them better.
absolutely.
Uh, every time I would cry, and the first year I'd be howling away, wherever she is, I wouldn't even notice her. She'd
She
come, she'd
comes.
clamber up on my lap and lick away my tears.
Yeah,
And she'd be so concerned. The body language is like so amazing. So they have a very visceral understanding of grief. Yeah.
yeah.
And
But I don't know what it is. I have a lab, so I have the same relationship, but I don't know what it is about them in particular. They really understand when a person is sad or grieving, and they are so wonderful and they're so giving.
yeah, and I think that also reminds me, Kaveri, in grief, you don't need to know the right words to
Yeah,
say. It actually doesn't need words.
yeah,
It's a very pre-verbal form of expression. You can communicate beautifully without words, through body language, that you're just there for the person. It's so simple. If dogs can do that, which is not to underestimate their beautiful capacities in any way, but why is it we humans find it so difficult
exactly.
to do that?
To
Yeah,
empathize with people.
yeah, exactly. Or why do we empathize only with certain situations?
Yeah.
In fact, I remember my mom telling me that situations like what you've been through, that calls for greater empathy and support.
Course.
Yeah,
Than an ordinary, I wouldn't call it any death
yeah,
ordinary, but
yes.
another kind of death.
Yeah, a kind of death which is not stigmatized. I think
Exactly.
there's a world of a difference, Kaveri, because it's stigma which is complicating the whole thing, and we internalize the
Yeah.
stigma, and we completely own it. Yeah, yeah,
Just before we leave, Nandini, I know this is not exactly related, but I think it's important for public discourse. I felt that the discourse around suicide and mental health took such a leap backwards last year with this very public sort of, almost a public investigation in a way into what happened to Sushant Singh Rajput. When you saw that, if you followed that, what did you think about that? It was most objectionable.
yeah. Ironically, Kaveri, ever since this has happened to me, anything about suicide, I immediately,
It happens.
yeah, I my antennae is up,
Yeah.
and I just read every little bit. I still remember the day he died, and the pictures were floating everywhere on the net. It was, I was triggered when I saw it. In fact, I was called up a colleague and a very good friend, and I said, "Have you seen this on the internet?" And she's someone very sensitive, and she said, "Oh my gosh, it's terrible."
Right.
Yeah, even if, and I think I'm simply appalled with the media insensitivity.
I'm sorry to say, but it really was.
Yeah, it is. I don't know why it's so difficult to, just adhere to those guidelines. Those guidelines are very simple. And at Speak, we do a media sensitization
Yeah. Really.
workshops, but
Yeah.
nobody comes.
Oh,
You know,
really?
yeah, seriously. And Kaveri, I would just love to do a workshop on responsible reporting on suicide.
I really think we should do this.
Yeah, if we
Let me,
can.
of course. I mean,
Seriously, seriously. How not to turn suicide or even say COVID right now into tragedy porn.
yeah, yeah. We
That
really
is,
should do this.
either they do this
Huh.
or they don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And in fact, when Sushant's incident was my thoughts went out to his family. How would they be dealing with this? Uh, oh my gosh, there must be such an overwhelm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and nowhere, and I'm very disappointed with the way suicide is being portrayed in the media, Kaveri. There are no stories of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are
That's
no stories of people who have, been impacted by suicide or who have attempted suicide and survived and gone on to lead fulfilling lives. I think this is where the media plays such a role in changing narratives.
right.
It's just not always about TRPs, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. But, it's difficult to say what's going on with the
Yeah.
media. But yeah, there are other medias as well. And I think we should definitely take this opportunity to do something on this.
Can we? I would just
Of course, it's
love
a
to do
lovely
that with
idea.
you. Yeah.
It's a lovely idea. We really should do that. We will. Nandini Murali, I just want to thank you again for writing this beautiful book and for giving us all hope. And I think that is again very significant and very important that there is life beyond and we should celebrate it, especially during these times. It's so easy to slip into doom and gloom. I
Absolutely.
think
Yeah.
thank you
I
very much for speaking up, for writing, for constantly trying to push this counter narrative.
I loved this conversation with you, Kaveri. It was so easy, so flowing. In fact, I don't want it to end. I could go on and we could go on and on
We
and on.
could, we could. But I think our viewers will tell us, please, please, let's get into the responsible reporting stuff. But I think we should do that
Yeah.
responsible reporting
And
workshop for
and
sure.
and I
We will.
hope this is the beginning of the first of many more meaningful conversations with us, with
Absolutely.
you,
I
and
would
with
love to
the
do that.
yes.
Thank you so much, Nandi Mulli, for all your time and for all your patience and for all the ways of teaching us how to, I wouldn't say overcome, but as you said, to get through grief. I think
Yes.
that is a very important thing to get through it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, Kaveri. Bye bye.